We're getting a lot of Namatai, I would like to invite you to go first. In terms of unpacking the topic, the Zimbabwean crisis, women as solution holders, what needs to be done? Namatai, can you hear me?
Hello, now I can hear you.
Okay.
Hello.
I was saying I'd like you to go first in terms of unpacking the topic, the Zimbabwean crisis, women as solution holders, what needs to be done. Would you like to take your 5 minutes now?
Absolutely great. All right, so I think maybe I'll just start by saying that we need to be cognizant of the fact that whatever solutions are going to be brought in this country with regards to the Zimbabwean crisis, women, and in particular young women, are going to have to be central. And we say this in the context that women constitute the majority of the population, and particularly young women. So I think that maybe the first thing that needs to be stated and that needs to be clearly articulated is the crisis itself. What are we taming, the Zimbabwean crisis? What's the Zimbabwean crisis? And in this context, we appreciate that it's an amalgamation of different facets, from the economic, the social, the political. All of these things are interacting in such a way that they're going to affect men and women differently. They're going to affect older women and younger women differently. And that's in the context of the crisis. So maybe we start off with the political crisis. In the context that human rights violations are something that are very imminent, in the context that there's no freedom of speech, in the context that we're seeing young women, human rights defenders, young political activists who are women, being brutalized, sometimes even sexually. So we experience a certain kind of violence that is unique and specific to us because we are women. Then we look at it from the perspective of the social aspect, we look at it from the perspective of the economic aspect. The lockdown, the COVID-19 lockdown, has intensified a crisis that had already been there. And we'll see that the number of, the number of abuses, domestic violence, and things like that has actually escalated. So we think about this from the context that how is it affecting women? We appreciate that men and women are different, and we appreciate that women will uniquely experience, this crisis differently from whatever part it's coming from. So it's quite instrumental for us to then say women have to be central when it comes to resolving this crisis, solving this crisis. Because when we look at it from the perspective that young women, first of all, like I say, they constitute the majority. Then second of all, we are not in a position where we are going to have solutions that are going to be inclusive for everyone, solutions that are going to, in all of these issues, also be cognizant and sensitive to women and their specific needs if we are not being represented by women in decision-making and in positions of influence. So I actually say that the crisis that we experience in our country is because we have a patriarchal regime, we have a patriarchal government, and this patriarchy escalates itself to business, it escalates itself to economics, it escalates itself to all other facets of life. And one of the key things that we must work on for us to be in a position where we, assist women, or maybe assist is not the appropriate word, but where we create opportunity for women to actually be in a position where they are strategically positioned to, solve the crisis that exists, is to feminize our systems, to feminize our government, feminize our political parties, feminize our businesses, so that we ensure that women are represented. And one of the key things that is essential in making sure that that happens is being able to implement the Constitution, which clearly stipulates aspects to do gender parity. So I think for now, I'll settle at that.
Thank you so much, Namatsai. And I really like what you said in terms of the feminization of the Zimbabwean crisis, because it brings about the different narratives that both men and everyone, men and women are facing, but especially young women. So thank you for that. Mantate, would you like to go for your 5 minutes now and unpack the topic, the Zimbabwean crisis, women as solution holders, what needs to be done?
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you, Namatai, as well, for just opening for us. I wanted to just focus on 3 key areas that I feel are of concern to me, especially as a young woman. Because I feel that sometimes when you talk about the crisis having affected women, we tend to forget that there's that demographic of young women that really needs to be discussed. So the first thing that I wanted to have a conversation about is the issue of the lockdown itself, the fact that a lot of young women were forced to stay at home, some of them staying at home with people that have been for a long time perpetrators of abuse. So you discover that a lot of them were not safe at home. And just recently, I think 3 days back, we had a headline in one of our newspapers that was the way it was written, it was something like shockers 4 grade 7 schoolgirls fall pregnant during lockdown. And the conversation that has been there on Twitter and other social media platforms has been a question of when did we shift from calling it rape to a situation where we just assume or state something that talks of us being shocked that girls were pregnant, but we move away from the idea that this is actually reflective of abuse and sexual violation, because these are grade 7 kids, these are underage kids, so they did not consent to this. So I think that's the biggest problem I've had as well, issues of safety for our girls, but also within that framework of staying at home as well. If you're looking at some of those cases of abuse, you discover that if a child is abused by a father or a brother, because now they're spending more time with the family would rather protect they call it the dignity of the father, but I don't understand why we speak of the dignity of a man when he's abused and indignified a woman. So that's one of the problems that I feel we really have as a crisis in the country. But also I'm looking at a situation where if you look at places like Bulawayo, where there's a huge water crisis, and I've been seeing a lot of tweets and videos around the fact that people are going as early as 4 a.m. or even earlier just to hold queues so that they get water in boreholes, or at least prepare for when the council water comes for delivery and stuff like that. So you discover that it becomes very unsafe for young women, because if I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. and have to queue for water, it means that at the level of security, I am not safe as a young woman. So there's a higher risk of sexual abuse of young women due to this water crisis. But also looking at this water crisis, the other thing that we have as a challenge in Zim is the issue of access to sanitary ware for girls. I think this has been really accelerated around this COVID-19 period, because I remember when the national budget was approved, we were told that there was a budget allocation for young girls in schools to actually get sanitary ware. But because schools have been closed and no one has been holding the government accountable to say who actually got the sanitary pads, because the kids are they're actually at home and not at school. So that's another question that needs to be answered. But beyond that as well, there is the issue of the transport crisis in Zimbabwe right now, where you're realizing that a lot of the people are having to queue for Zuko buses, and you discover that some of those queues actually stretch to the evening, and you find that some of those girls have to take even longer to get home. And it comes back to the issue of the security after dark, because I think we've seen reports of how crime has generally increased, there's more robberies around this time. So you discover that our girls are not safe. But more than just the problems that we're looking at, I think the question that we're really trying to answer today is what must be done. And my first point of call really is with the law enforcement itself, because if you look at the crisis I mentioned earlier about grade 7 girls that have fallen pregnant, one of the things that was noted is that the police is not actually, they don't seem proactive around the issue. And when you discover, the report is talking about a conversation with the district education officer, one of the things it mentions is that we will wait for schools to open and then we'll see who is absent and then take up the issue. And that worries me a lot, because while you're waiting for schools to open and you can look at the number of girls that are not showing up at school, so that you can determine or decide that, okay, these are potentially the girls that have been abused or the girls that have fallen pregnant. I think during that time, while you're waiting, there's a girl that needs support, there's a girl that needs to report this, because as I said earlier, it's sexual abuse. So we really need the law itself and the Ministry of Education to be more active. But also beyond that, there's the issue of reporting in Zimbabwe, where a lot of our girls are struggling to report abuse because the police doesn't take them seriously, or in some instances you find that someone goes to the police to report abuse, and these police officers will actually ask these kids or these young girls to sleep with them in order to accelerate these cases. So that's another big problem. And also coming back to the media as well, to say the way that we report issues, especially issues of abuse of young women, also has a lot with the way that people receive it. Because if you look at a situation where someone reports shock as 4 grade 7 girls fall pregnant during lockdown, instead of actually saying rape of young girls or primary school girls, you discover that focus moves away from perpetrators of sexual abuse into actually blaming the victims for apparently falling pregnant. And there's that issue as well for civil society and everyone else to actually hold government accountable. For instance, in issues of access to sanitary, where I mentioned that there was a budget allocation for sanitary pads, but to this day, we're not told who actually got this, because the promise had been that it's going to schoolgirls, but no one has been at school since March. So the question really is, where did this money go? And then also the last thing that I think must be done is the increase in the number of safe houses. I mentioned earlier that some of these girls are forced to stay at home with perpetrators of violence or sexual abuse. So discover that there is no place for them to run to. Civil society organization can be overwhelmed as well. So there is need for the state to make provision for the safe houses where young girls can actually go there if they're abused. So I think that's basically my state of the nation right now and some of the ideas for how we can play around addressing this issue.
Thank you, Mantante. That was a very profound unpacking of the topic today. And let me just give Nangamso an opportunity to unpack the topic for us before I'll come back to the panelists. Nangamso, please.
I definitely support Namatai and Mantate's call for women, and particularly young women, to come to the front and to be able to not only brainstorm and give an account of what the issues are, but to also be included in how do we formulate and how do we design the necessary solutions for all of us to be able to live in a safe environment. And that is a safe environment even during the lockdown. I do also express concern that I have heard that there has been a challenge when it comes to access to water and basic human primary services in Zimbabwe. So that is something that definitely would call upon a united force to come up with ideas and to brainstorm solutions as to how do we hold those that are accountable for delivering those primary basic human services, and how do we ensure that the institutions that are responsible for those services to be delivered are actually actioning out their mandate. One of the things that I would like to express interest in also looking at how we can work together to achieve is the inclusion and the support of women who wish to add value to not only legislation, but also developmental theories of change that are necessary in Zimbabwe's case. Also, I would extend that further to say, perhaps touching on including women and supporting women with the appetite to lead efficiently and effectively, most particularly in the legislation environment. And lastly, I would like to also contribute towards ideas of how do we coordinate a network, not only women, but all stakeholders who are advocates for human rights, justice, and freedom.
Thank you so much, Nangamso, for that unpacking. Rumbidzai, would you like to take your 5 minutes and unpack the topic, the Zimbabwean crisis, women as solution holders, what needs to be done? Rumbidzai, can you hear me? Rumbi, you're up next, if you can hear me. Okay. Priscilla, would you like to go next? It looks like Rumbidzai's mic is unmuted, but I cannot hear her. Priscilla, would you like to go next?
Yes.
Affecting the topic?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I think I would like to start by just congratulating WALP for putting this together. For some of us who have been on this road before, it is a welcome change to what has been going on in Zimbabwe. And you probably know that some of us have refused to comment on anything that is happening in Zimbabwe, precisely because we felt that the narrative was very male. And I'm quite excited that we are beginning to talk about how we bring in a feminist narrative to what is going on. So as I speak to the unpacking, I think language is important. I'm not sure that the language that we have taken on in even beginning to talk about this process is a female language. And I'll justify it. Females never really talk around crisis, because if we spoke about crisis, nothing would ever happen. I mean, there's always some problem from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. That's your women's life. And I think the way we have dealt with it is because we have understood problems as challenges. Because the moment you look at a crisis, it disempowers you. The moment you define something as a crisis, it disempowers you. You start at a level in which this is so big, it can't be dealt with. So I would say, as I unpack what is happening in Zimbabwe, I would say perhaps the lingo has to change. So for Zimbabwe, we are looking at what are the challenges from a feminist perspective. We've been there before. And when I say we've been there before, if you look at the role of women during the challenges, the post-colonial challenges, the role of women as we crafted the constitution, which we are very proud of, was on the basis of what are the challenges and how do we ensure that we deal with those challenges from both an institutional point of view and from a legislative point of view. And there were structures that women built to be able to come to the point where we agreed on what the challenge was. So as we have this discussion, I see it as the beginning of a process. Because I remember that when we, prior to going into the inclusive government, we actually had a closed door process with a few women at that particular point in time, where we came up with a white paper. But we spent a bit more time to say, but what exactly is our challenge? Are some of these challenges that we are taking on because they have been fed into us so many times? Do we have taken them as our challenges? Is there a different way of beginning to define those challenges? And just listening to colleagues that have spoken before, I can begin to see the different trends that we could take on. And like Namatai said, both from a political, economic, and social. And I'm sure if we were to sit down as women, we may actually find that our narrative is completely different from the narrative that is given to the world. And understandably, let's also understand that Zimbabwe has been internationalized. And with internationalization comes a particular narrative. The question is, that narrative, what is it based on? What are the ideological issues that are foundational to the narrative that we have taken on as a narrative for Zimbabwe? Is there no time, particularly if we are talking as feminists, of beginning to critique that narrative, not only from a male-female perspective, but from an ideological perspective? Because I think there are underlying ideological perspectives that are associated with the challenges that Zimbabwe has. Very simply put, without taking most of your time, I actually believe as feminists, we have always been leftist to some extent. Is the globalization that is happening, where capital and capitalism has taken over the definition of what is socially acceptable, what is economically acceptable, what is politically acceptable. Has it impacted on what is currently happening in Zimbabwe? And I find it a bit sad when we deal with the issues and the challenges of Zimbabwe purely from what is happening in Zim and not necessarily from global forces and the ideological issues that we are beginning to see that not only impact on Zimbabwe, but on Africa in general. So that is a whole lot of things that I've put there, but I'm hoping that we can actually find some indaba, closed indaba, a safe space in which we can interrogate some of these things more detailed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. And yes, the language will change as of now, right now. So the Zimbabwean situation, women as solution holders, what needs to be done? I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Rumbi?
Hi, Grace. Can you hear me?
Oh, fantastic. Yes, I can hear you, my sister. Welcome. Your
Okay.
5 minutes to unpack and maybe also speak a little bit about the elections and by-elections and that situation, being an expert around those issues.
Okay, Grace, but let's take one thing at a time, because if we now start bringing in the dynamics of elections, that's also another indaba, separate indaba that we would need. I just want to build on what everyone else has said. And in relation to what Priscilla was saying about the narrative, I really think that we need to have a very deep understanding of what we are dealing with, because that deep understanding will help us, as Priscilla rightly says, and Namatai have mentioned, and all the other colleagues as well, to pinpoint what are the issues. And indeed, I think if we to talk about a crisis, we've always been a country in a crisis mode for years. So now we might just call them issues and challenges, perennial issues and challenges that we need to address. And for me, it might, I just want to give it a very broad outlook that, you know, I think all the issues and challenges that are really entrenched and deep-seated within Zimbabwe and what we are going through right now and what we've gone through over the years, it's so much entrenched in the socio-cultural systems and processes of the country, to an extent where a lot of what I see happening is that as women, we act so much as the custodians of culture and the doers of so-called culture without unpacking its impact on us individually as women and as women as a group. And in that regard, we have a very patriarchal system, and patriarchy, it's all about male privilege. And this is what gives the basis, at least from my perspective, the basis of the problems for Zimbabwe, where there is a lot of patriarchal entitlement and privilege, such that everybody else, you know, there's a ranking. And even as women, we are not a homogeneous group. And this is why even our narrative is weakened, because we are not looking at the issues of what is this system doing in terms of exercising power over us, rather than empowering us and us empowering ourselves so that it can be power sharing and exercising power with us. I see a lot of the social cultural issues that come in many ways, whether it's even in the education, in as much as we might claim that women in Zimbabwe and the men in Zimbabwe are highly educated in terms of the academic, the papers, but it does not bring wisdom and understanding of what is happening and what needs to be changed. So what we have is the book knowledge, but we don't have the wisdom for transformative change and development. If at all, it's like we are going 100 steps backwards. If you look at Zimbabwe right now, it's almost like, I don't know, it's something that we never imagined would find ourselves in such a country, in such a context. And therefore, I think the monster called patriarchy and how it has entrenched itself, such that even as women, we don't see the dysfunction from an individual women's perspective and as broadly as women as a group. Take violence against women, whether it emanates in the private or so-called domestic sphere, and how it manifests itself at a national level, and how we are able to rationalize and explain it to a certain extent. It's mind-boggling. And I'm always thinking, what is it that we need to do to uproot this social cultural context, which then has political, impacts on the political, economic, everything else. But we have allowed a certain way of life where it's the domination, it's all about domination and male domination, and a few or thereabouts, a group of women that can be identified as part of the male dominated network, and everybody else has to be subjected and be oppressed and be silenced. So I don't think I have like pinpointed like one quick fix solution, but I think we really need to unpack and say, what system are we dealing with and where are the points for breakthroughs? Because it's so entrenched and it affects everything.
All right, thank you so much, Rumbi. Thank you very much. I like your focus on the system and what needs to be done in terms of working with that and unpacking it. I want to come to you, Namatai, and I know that you're very passionate about the constitutional amendments, and I want to hear from you, what do you think needs to be done to facilitate for broader constitutional amendment number 2 consultations, and making sure that young women's voices are included when we look at issues to do with that?
All right, so thank you so much for the question, Grace. I think maybe I'll just start from a place of just acknowledging that at the point where we are at, I'm sure Honorable Mr. can affirm this. We are past the stage where they can be much in the way of consultation with regards to the due legal processes around how constitutions are amended. So we are past that stage, but maybe we can look at this from a reflective perspective, because I, for one, am extremely disgruntled and unhappy about how the process was done. So I'm very excited that Honorable Priscilla is here. Yeah, maybe she can also share the sentiments with her colleagues. I mean, the fact that these consultations were held during the COVID-19 lockdown and pandemic is in itself an exclusionary tactic. You know, to leave a lot of the important voices, particularly the voice of the majority, who are the young women, out. We can be cognizant of some of the issues that Mantanta raised, that already because it was the COVID-19 lockdown, you could appreciate that it was difficult to move around. It posed so many security issues for women to be moving around, to access some of these now with how the process has just proceeded without the voices of the many, which have been discredited on account that, according to the Minister of Justice, you say that the people who attended the hearing were court-sponsored to say no. So I think maybe I'll come back to a point that I raised when I first gave my submission, to say that we have to feminize everything. We have to feminize our constitution. We have to feminize our systems. We have to feminize all of these things, because as it were, these systems, these consultations, these processes, all of these things can afford to go ahead without women, because these systems are patriarchal systems. The Constitution itself has very strong patriarchal inclinations. And we have to feminize all of that for us to be in a position where we will see the unequivocal representation of women without women having to beg or to demand. Because that's the only way we can culturalize feminism and it becomes a way of life. So those will be my reflections with regards to the constitutional amendment bill. But all I can just emphasize is that we are at a point where we are past the consultations. And looking back, this is a big conversation that we are supposed to have, where we are able to say, how best can we in future ensure that we amplify the voices of particularly young women in these processes when they happen.
All right, thank you so much for that, Namatai. Mantate, I would like you to speak a little bit more around the human rights violations that you spoke about, but maybe focus on the human rights violations against women, human rights defenders and activists. I know Namatai is a survivor of this, but I'd like to hear it from you, Mantante, because of what you said earlier on around human rights violations against women and activists for that matter. What has been happening from what you see and what can be done to address that?
Okay, thank you so much, Grace. Yeah, so I think my comment, first of all, especially around the abuse of young women, especially from political parties, especially the MDC in the situation in Zimbabwe. I think it's something that's not just in Zimbabwe. If you look at Mozambique recently, there was a video of a young woman, a woman was beaten up by soldiers and then she was shot dead. And the government has also been going to extents to just prove that this was not military man. And it's the same situation in Zimbabwe. If you look at the constant reports of women being abducted, women being abused, and then you find that the state will go to lengths to prove that it is not what we're saying. And it's very difficult, especially for me as a young woman who has an opinion around issues of governance and politics, because it's as if it's a message being sent to us that don't try us or don't speak on issues because this is what we can do to you. And the fact that the law itself, if you look at an example of Joanna and the other two ladies from MDC, the first time that they were actually found after the 3 days they had been missing, you discover that the police ideally should be proactive in the sense of trying to discover what happened to those women and bring justice. But the effort from the onset was just to prove that this is not what it is. So it's very difficult in Zimbabwe right now, especially for us young women, because we are not too sure we are safe. If you want to give an opinion as to the issues, for instance, issues of corruption in Zimbabwe, issues even of human rights abuses, you're not too sure you can say that very boldly because you don't have the lawyers that can bail you out when things go wrong. You don't have the security or the safe house to run to because you're too scared to think that someone might actually come to your house at night. And also just beyond these ladies in the political party, there was a young lady in Bulawayo, I can't remember her name, I think it was around July thereabout. The reports that I saw the issue on Twitter where this young woman was taken and raped and then brought back to her home. And I think for me, the concern came from the comments that were coming from Twitter where people were saying that, why is she dressed like that? Or she's a slut, this one. If I had the space as well, I would probably rape her too. It's these comments that we get online that make the space unsafe for women. So I don't think that Zimbabwe, as it stands, is very safe for women. Also because, like I said earlier, the fact that the police as custodians of the law and the very people were supposed to be protecting us young women, those are the same people that work to prove that these young women are lying, because that's what happened. And it's such a huge concern for me as a young woman. And also the other thing I want to mention around this issue of abuse is the fact that these are documented cases that was whatever it is and shared on social media so that people start advocating around that. So you discover that there is a possibility that there are so many other cases of abuse that is politically motivated that are not being reported in Zimbabwe. And because we're not seeing these cases, we'll just keep going on to think, oh, it's just the 3 young women. It's just that young women in Zimbabwe. So I think there is need for more work. I don't know if it should be civil society organizations on their own but there's need for, I don't know, some form of research or some form of investigation, especially in those remote areas where ordinarily people would not report, because I do think that there's so many other cases. I gave an example of the Mozambique issue to say this is just one case of a video of a woman being beaten and killed, and if the state can go on to defend that, you can imagine how many more young women or how many more women actually are being beaten up, are being abducted, are being raped and all those things, and no one is reporting on that. So I think that's the concern for me, the idea that Zimbabwe is no longer safe for women, the fact that the law enforcement itself is no longer protecting us women, but is playing around the issues of politics. Because in Zimbabwe right now, if I stood up and said that I was raped, the question comes in to say, which political party am I from? What have I been saying on Twitter and things like that? So we really need some sanity in the law enforcement in Zimbabwe. And we also need to have, I think, media. I think that this is where media comes in to say our investigative journalism should really work to counter this narrative that supports the government when it chooses to justify the abuse of young women. So if we actually have media that exposes these cases of abuse, media that investigates into those areas where ordinarily abuse would not be reported, I think we might actually be in a better place to advocate as women, human rights defenders.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Mantate. That's very profound. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. Next, I want to come to you, my sister, Nangamso, and I want you to talk about what you have done using the 5x5 hashtag Uniting Youth across Southern Africa. What sort of coaching and mentorship initiatives have you used to work with women and solution holders to address different situations in the various countries that you're working in?
Thank you, Grace. Touching on the 5x5 Uniting Youth strategy and concept, in particular, when we designed that concept together with peers from various countries in the SADC region, and I mean, those peers also included fellow friends from Zimbabwe, we were particularly looking at youth apathy at the time. And we were looking at what is it that is necessary to unite and coordinate young people to be able to not only identify the issues, but to also contribute the necessary solutions and to also include those young people at the time of delivering those solutions, whether that be at a local level, at a regional level, or even at a national level. What we were particularly calling for is reducing the youth apathy gap and also including and supporting young people to be included in decision-making platforms. That strategy is very much a strategy that may also be adapted to uniting women. And I mean, you can simply look at what are the issues that women are faced with in various countries on the continent, and not only necessarily isolate Zimbabwe, but you can look at a variety of countries. What are the issues that women are faced with, and how may we as women coordinate ourselves and be able to deliver the solutions that are necessary for our, not only our health, but also for our safety, for our advancement, for us being able to contribute towards investing in the developmental societies that we would like to live in. And I think if we look at the mission and we look at the vision of the Women's Academy for Leadership and Political Excellence, which is WALP, and which is the organization that has brought us together, I think WALP is very much in a position for us to collate ourselves around and be able to brainstorm those ideas and those theories of change. I pretty much support what Honorable Priscilla has proposed, which is that even our language needs to be a language that is inclusive and is inviting to women to come on board and to bring those suggestions and those ideas, which may eventually become our theories for change. I mean, if we look at the WALP research, which was basically a research that WALP had conducted, and that research was looking at implications of young women and women with disabilities. It was particularly looking at what are the implications of marginalizing women from leadership and decision-making processes, which fits very much into what we may be able to adapt the 5x5 Uniting Women strategy to try and assist us with coming up with those solutions. I also would echo what Honorable Priscilla and Rumbidzai have proposed, and they have both eloquently introduced the focal point, which is that of foundational ideological limitations. And these can also be extended to even observing the cultural and the behavioral traits that have in some way been standardized as societal norms. How are they impacting how we as women live in our communities? How are they impacting how our communities perceive and receive us? And how are they impacting how our communities interact with us? Which then leads us to the subject topic of violence against women. Now, the violence against women, we can all see that it's not only confined to our homes. You can see that in particular, this violence against women is particularly actioned against women who possess the capacity to lead, and also those women who raise their hands to rise and campaign for public office. The challenge of violence against women, it definitely is not only confined to our homes. It transcends to public arena, and it also now can be seen in the digital communication platforms that we are appealing for support from. Because those digital communication platforms, they allow us to appeal for a broader support and not only limit us to seeking support within our communities or within our countries. They take us right all over the world when we call for all women to rise and support the challenges that we are faced with as women. And I think these challenges are not only limited to Zimbabwe, these challenges are right across the continent and even globally. According to the research that has been published from various countries on the continent, the trends indicate that violence seems to peak most particularly during the 12 months that precede any decision that needs to be enacted. And those decisions also include the decisions that we make when we go to the ballots and we vote for political parties. They can also include decisions when it comes to electing or delegating or nominating various persons who may lead in any institution that will be responsible for the general conduct of a society. So I think those are the kind of points that I would perhaps be keen to engage about how do we solve these problems and who can we reach out to in order for us to form a united network of not only women, but we also include political parties, civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations, and also even take it as far as including the businesses, the individuals, and also industry leaders that may help us with coming up with these solutions.
Thank you very much, Namgamso, for that transnational input in terms of what can be done for women to hold hands and address the kind of situations that they find their countries in. Rumbidzai, I would like to hear from you. Namatai earlier on mentioned issues to do with quota systems and consultative processes. And right now there are calls for by-elections without reforms. What would you say to that? And do you think that we're ready even for 2013? I know you said earlier on, it's a conversation that actually needs an endeavor, but since we don't have an endeavor and you've got like 3 minutes to respond, what would be your quick inputs and interjections to this, Rumbidzai? Thanks.
Grace, so in terms of the conducting an election, the by-election, or what specifically? Can you come
again? There've been many calls for by-elections, but they've not been reformed. So my question to you is, what are your thoughts around having by-elections or even elections without reforms? And what does this mean for women, considering the politics around what Namatai said in terms of quota systems, in terms of how women participate in politics, even what Namgamso has just said. Is that clearer?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
I mean, it's a tragedy, Grace, because like it goes back to what I said initially. The system that is there and those who have the governing power to do what they think they need to do, like whether they call it it's the rule of law, but yet it's actually the rule by law. To what extent is there the harnessing of voices and willpower to prevent them from doing that? I'm just thinking of recently of what we are seeing happening. It is an illustrative example in Belarus, where, you know, elections are conducted because they will be conducted just to conduct elections, but it doesn't change anything. And the call for reforms that we're talking about, these are not calls that have emerged like in the past month or in the past year. They've been calls put forward since the new constitution was put in place. And then the demands to say we need to align the electoral law and electoral reform processes with the new constitution in order for it to be implementable and deliver on substantive gains and transformation. But all of that is not happening. It's not possible. And then you start saying to yourself, in a context like Zimbabwe, who polices the military? Who polices the military? Because then the military is used against the people. And who polices the military? The police itself, as a law enforcement agency, to what extent are they able to deliver on their mandate in a way that is in line with the will for the people? And as long as we have all those issues, we can be saying Parliament is functioning, Parliament has approved it, but in what way is Parliament functioning that can in a way be said to be impacting and delivering on the constitutional mandates and constitutional guarantees or expectations or aspirations of the people of Zimbabwe as they set down, as they contributed to the writing of the constitution? So I see a situation where the political and current system and processes, they will just unfold and go on, and we will discuss and protest in the ways that we have always done. And then what? So I think maybe to a certain extent we are, because this is a very brutal, entrenched political and system that we are dealing with. It's very brutal. It's very, very brutal. I always say, when you look at you know, the ability to transform from a liberation struggle movement to be a political party that is inclusive, that functions on the basis of multi-diversity and different voices and listening to different views and opinions. I don't think there's a political system that is able to do that right now in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Because all that have attempted to do that have been crushed. So the election keeps being, you know, stolen one way or the other.
Thank you so much, Mbizai, for that. That's a very sobering outlook in terms of what we're focusing on in terms of elections and the environment thereof. Thank you very much for your contribution. Priscilla, I know your hand was up, and I also have a question for you. Would you like to first maybe address the issues that you wanted to speak to because your hand was up, and then maybe something linked to what Mbizai said, and a question that I think is important for you to respond to around the role of parliament and issues to do with bias of the courts, the state on security abuses and the partisan nature of the police. What are your thoughts around that in terms of what women can do as position holders and what needs to be done? Priscilla, over to you.
Okay, let me just answer it in the manner that I wanted to when I got a bit agitated. And let me say this, I need to be a bit brutally frank with all of us who are here, because I think it is important. Firstly,
it is.
We are not young, but we were young before. I actually think that we need to rethink this ageism thing that we have started putting up. I'm not saying it's wrong for you guys to always speak around your ages, but you need to be careful that it may actually mess up your strategy. Because one of the most frustrating things I've had with most of you guys who are young is you tend to speak as if you are the only ones who are living in a situation where things are difficult. And because you have that attitude, you have failed to pick up on the dots and the experiences that have happened before. This constitution that you keep talking about did not come from heaven. It was fought for. The provisions that you speak about in the constitution were fought for. The question that you should be asking yourselves is, are you of the belief that the system at that time was so easy that we're able to get the provisions that we got? There must have been a different way of doing things that got us to where we were today, which process I don't see you doing. The reality of the situation is that there is no time in the world, in any country, to which you are going to have a sea change movement. It's not going to happen. It will always be incremental. And one of the frustrations, and this is in reference to the issue that Namatai raised, one of the frustrations that I had with Constitution number 2, particularly as it related to young women, is that you jumped on the bandwagon for Don't Touch Our Constitution, which for me did not make any sense. Because even within that constitution, it had not provided for issues around the inclusion of young women in political spaces. It may have a provision that says we need to include youth, but I thought it was an opportunity to begin to push the narrative that says, even if we are going to have a quota system, let's ensure that that quota system facilitates for the entrance of young women. But people thought that they could go to communities, mobilize women, and have women come to speak to that public hearings. And because we've been there before, I told you, dololo, nothing will come out of it. You need to be able to sit down and say, guys, for you to move from the NCA process to where you had a vote yes, and where you were able to bring all these other provisions that we now have in the Constitution, what is it that you did to bring women onto the table? And when they say women, you have to bring women from all the political directions. If your narrative begins to be a narrative that is targeting or is seen to be playing a particular narrative, you are not going to bring all the women around the table. And because those other women that are in the spaces where you don't want to engage with are actually the movers and shakers for this period that we are in. So I think let's be realistic about the things that we're able to say. Let's be able to say, in this particular context, what are the incremental things that we can do? For example, very quickly, we can't keep talking about these issues of abductions if we don't deal with the institutional issues. We have section 210 in the Constitution, which section is supposed to create an independent mechanism for bringing the state security to account in circumstances where there are allegations of violations. For me, that's where the women's movement should be coming together and saying it is there, it is provided for. We don't care whether you say it's alleged abductions or it's real abductions. The question is, how do we create an institutional framework that will stand for the time that we are going into? So I get a bit worked up by the lack of intergenerational conversations to which we are learning from each other. We learn from your energies, the young people's energies, about what is there, what we can do differently. But surely, until you say to yourselves, there is something to learn from the past, from where women came from the women who were arrested and beaten up, women who were violated and raped, women. It hasn't happened just now. We didn't wake up with these things today. It's a system. But there are people that have managed through that system. And for some reason, you guys are not interested in that. I begged and begged when we did the constitutional amendment number 2. Guys, let's find a space to sit down and you pick up on what happened before. We may not have been too successful, but trust me, the reason why you have this constitution that you are talking about is as a result of some women who stood in those spaces. No one was interested. No one was interested. You were very clear you're going to go through this and we were going to manage. And for some of us, we ended up saying, you know what, perhaps if you keep saying that thing, don't go by the fire, you get bent. People may not hear you. But I knew that we were exactly going to be where we are today, where nothing changed. With all that energy that you put into the processes, constitution number 2. So yes, the system is brutal. Yes, the system is patriarchal, but I refuse to go to a point where I say there is nothing that we can do because things are so bad. Otherwise, we would never be alive today. We would not be standing today. Find those women. Find the women who were there when we had the fights during the NCA. Find out why we had to form the Women's Coalition and what movement we did by getting our own space in the Women's Coalition. Even when we're sitting at the table with boys who thought they were being democratic and were Democrats, why was it important to then say, we may agree on some issues, but we can't totally, completely agree with everything else? My problem is you have taken this hook, line, and sinker and have said we are going to be with our boys, and I wish you the best with the boys. I have to say this.
Thank you so much, Priscilla, for that brutally honest insight. And I guess for me, what's interesting is that the conversation around ageism and how to unpack that has been a very interesting conversation over the years. And so thank you for that for those insights. There's a question that's maybe before I read the question to our participants, if you have any question or insight that you want us to read out, may you kindly just drop your question in the chat box, because we're getting into the round where we give participants an opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. And there's a question that's been sent now by some Keliso Chuma, and she say, and some Keliso Chuma says, do we amend the Constitution or do we align our laws to the Constitution? The Constitution speaks on gender equality and inclusion of women in decision-making processes. We need laws that will enforce that. So who would like to take the question on, do we amend the Constitution or do we align our laws to the Constitution? Priscilla, would you like to respond to that one?
Sorry, I kind of missed that. Something happened with my audio. What was the question, love?
The question is, do we amend the Constitution or do we align our laws to the Constitution?
I don't, and this is a different, it's a conversation we need to have. As one person who sat at the negotiating table, I am not persuaded that everything that is in that Constitution cannot be changed, because I also know that there are decisions that we made that were purely political and because it was a negotiation. So I think there will be circumstances in which certain changes to the Constitution will have to be made. But yes, I totally agree with you The first point right now would be to ensure that we have the alignment of the Constitution. And this is why I was coming to Section 210, to say, for me, if there is anything that we need to mobilize women around so that we can deal with this monster of abductions or no abductions, is the issue of putting into place Section 210 and put it into place in a manner that it is an institution that is a safe institution for women. It is a trustworthy institution for women. And that is the conversation that we'll be having. Instead of dealing with one issue at a time, today it's so and so, tomorrow it's Priscilla, tomorrow it's Jane. The reason why it is in the Constitution is because we acknowledge that even at that particular point in time, we had problems associated with it. But I did not buy into your mantra of don't touch this Constitution. I still don't, because I think there will be things that we will have to improve in that Constitution, particularly to bring in the things that were not brought into the fore during the constitutional process. So, but again, like I said, it's another debate.
Okay. All right. I think it would be interesting to hear from you, Namatai, because Namatai and Mantate, I know that Namatai, you're very passionate about the Constitution, and you've heard what Priscilla had said. What would be your response to that, to those remarks and those insights? Namatai first.
All right. So thanks very much, Grace, for the question. And thank you very much to Honorable Priscilla for that very heartfelt submission. I think maybe how I would respond to that is to just say that the fact that young women that might not consistent with the voices
Sorry,
of those
Namatai.
who were before
Namatai,
them
just hold on.
is not a reflection that we in any way do not agree.
Sorry, Batanai, can you mute Godfrey? Godfrey's really making noise from the background. Can you mute his mic, please? Godfrey, mute your mic, or Batanai, can you mute, because we can hardly hear Namatai now. Batanai, please mute Godfrey. Thank you very much. Namatai, sorry about that. Please go ahead and give your contribution. Namatai? Okay, I'm not sure what's going on with Namatai there. Mantante, would you like to give your contribution? Hello? Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, great. So I was just saying that I really wanted to express my gratitude for the heartfelt submissions that Honorable Ms. Abri gave. But I just wanted to also maybe reiterate the sentiment that just because we as young people or as young women might not have, views consistent with those of, those who came before us, that's not in any way to reflect that we do not appreciate or that we want to sort of like maybe, do away with what was done. I think maybe it's just all about being in a position where we appreciate that we also have to be given enough space as young women to also, define our future and to stand with the narratives that speak truth to our times. And this sometimes might not be consistent with what was there, but it in no way devalues what has been done before. So I'll put it in the context of how I don't agree with certain things that my mom does. And she lets me be because she knows that I'm a different person and I am behaving in such a manner that is, consistent with the experiences that we're experiencing now. So I just wanted to say that with regards to, the decisions that have been made, particularly in the context of the women's quota, particularly in the context of women's participation, the solutions of which are always different, based upon our standpoints. And I'm a firm believer in intergenerational conversation and intergenerational dialogue. But I also believe that in our efforts to find a position of mutuality where we're able to stand together and speak with one voice, we must be in a position where we do not suffocate or stifle alternative ideas simply because we are, more interested in creating cohesion. I always say, at what extent? We always have to be in a position where we appreciate creativity and innovation around processes, and to also, welcome divergent views to processes, because realistically speaking, you can never really have one voice. That is the ideal, but you can never really have one voice. So I will just reiterate the sentiment that, whenever we see young women, speaking their truth that is reflective of their times, we are actually, looking forward to the older women, finding how they can also help us, to sort of feed into what was there. And I think it's always about, being able to find each other and reaching out to each other. But then again, when we get to a point where we are speaking different truths that are relevant, maybe based upon the different times to which we have found ourselves, it is also very important for us to not, stifle certain ideas, because we just genuinely want to advance the idea of having one voice. So again, I'll reiterate the sentiment that younger women not, agreeing maybe with what was there, it is not to create maybe a generational conflict, but it is a reflection of our identity and our lived experiences and our times. I think those would be my reflections. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much for that, Namatai. Mantate, would you like to go next? Mantate, are you still here?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Grace. So I have two responses on the question of whether we should align or amend the Constitution, and also just looking at what Priscilla said, the idea that the Constitution at some point will be changed. And it's very true, the Constitution itself makes provision for changes if the reasons for the changes are actually compelling enough, or at least if it responds to the needs of Zimbabwe, if it's people-centered. And also looking at that, I'm going to first address the idea of amending the Constitution, looking specifically at the proposed extension of the women's quota and the introduction of a youth quota. So first of all, on the side of the women's quota, if you look at the way it has been implemented since 2013, like Priscilla said, that there is no mention of how the young woman fits into this idea of the women's quota. So there is no clarity as to say this is the number of women that should be under the age of 35 in this quota. So I think for me, that's the first place where this is problematic. And also, if you look at the quota system as well, you look at women in parliament who stand up to speak, women who got into parliament through this quota system. I've seen instances where fellow colleagues, male colleagues particularly, actually disrespect and insult these women and insult their opinions because they're thinking that you do not come into the space on a competent basis, but rather you came in through some sympathy card from whoever holds the system. But for me, that is very problematic because a lot of these women will then sit down when they want to give an opinion, because the assumption that is being given is that you didn't get in here through a competitive process, so really your opinion doesn't matter. For me, this is a risk that actually might be seen in the same way with the youth quota. And also, just speaking of the youth quota system, if we look at the way that it has been designed, there is a proposal to give us 10 seats as young people. And Zimbabwe is a very youthful population. The UNFPA statistics actually talk about how 62% of the population in Zimbabwe is below 25. And actually over 74% of Zimbabweans are actually less than the age of 35. So as we stand, if we're going to have 6 out of the 210 seats in parliament being held by young people, for me, that is very problematic. It doesn't reflect what the Constitution actually says about young people being able to participate. So we might want to think of a quota system as the idea of adding 10 more young people into parliament. But for me, it's problematic because we're looking at the quota system being an end to itself, but it's not. It's supposed to be a means towards youth participation. So in the case that we do actually have this quota system, these are some of the problems or some of the areas that I feel we need to address. First of all, if you look at this proposed youth quota, there is no mention of where the persons with disability fit into this whole idea of a quota system for young people. And there is one conversation that we're consistently having to say that disability cuts across different departments of government. So when we don't have a conversation around how we will ensure that persons with disability will be included, properly included in these 10 seats, for me, that is problematic. And also there's that question as well to say, the youth quota does not specifically say that there should be this number of young women, there should be this number of young men. And in the same way, it might actually be the same situation that we had with the women's quota, where we don't see young women coming in through the quota system because the law doesn't really push much around that. But also looking at the youth quota, you're looking at the way that these young people are going to be appointed. So there's 10 young people across the 10 provinces in Zimbabwe. And for me, it's problematic in the sense that it's forcing young people to be in political parties in order to stand a chance to be in this youth quota system. So it's closing out doors to independent thought. And if you look at the political situation in Zimbabwe, we have a government, or rather a ruling party that is very problematic. We also have an opposition party that is pretty chaotic right now. So you discover that the choices for young people to be involved in mainstream politics right now are pretty much very slim. So you discover that there are young people that ran for office in 2018 as independent candidates. There might be young women there might be young people that may want to also run as independents in the upcoming election. But because this youth quota is actually a system in which political parties appoint based on the percentage of candidates, or rather the elected officials that they have in parliament, it means that there is no chance for independent thought. Then the last thing within the youth quota for me is the idea of tokenism as well. You discover that in a lot of these parliamentary appointments, it's not just even in the members of parliament, but you look at the cabinet itself to say, if someone is given the power and the chance to appoint someone into an office, there is a danger of tokenism, in which if I put you in that office, you are somehow obliged to make sure that you align whatever views you're putting forward in parliament to what I am pushing. So you discover that even if we have those young people in parliament, there is a danger that they might actually support what their political parties are supporting, even if it's not to the interests of the young people. But then to close, also looking at the need to actually align the constitution of Zimbabwe. I think for me, the biggest issue really around this constitutional amendment for me has been say that, why are we amending the constitution? Does it mean that the government or whoever else is involved has failed to implement? Because some of these things have not been implemented. For instance, we talk about the need for gender equality. And I mentioned earlier that when we have a quota system, people tend to relax because we've got 60 women consistently across each election. So the assumption is, okay, we actually have women. So for me, until we have at least 50% of the 210 seats in parliament being women, and over 50% of those people being less than the age of 35, that is when we'll talk about aligning the constitution. So I think we really need to come down as a people, not just the government itself, but also us as civil society, to say, what really do we want? Because there is a danger that this proposal or the proposed amendment will actually proceed, because we've seen that in Zimbabwe. They consult us, we give ideas, but these things actually proceed. But in the instance that there's actually this youth quota system or the extension of the women's quota, what is this that we can hold the government accountable to ensure that there's respect of those young people or these women that will be elected in through quota systems, but also that there's inclusion of young women and persons living with disability?
Thank you so much, Mantate, for that response and for those insights. There's another question directed to Priscilla, and it says, Honorable Ms. Irambwi, would that independent institution section 210 you are talking about immune to capture by state? Look at how the judiciary system has been captured. What can be done to ensure its independence? So Priscilla, would you like to take that on? I think they're talking about the constitution and what it says, and how independent courts and various government wings are. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I will, but just a quick one. I hope I was understood. At no point did I imply that we are trying to force young people to think in the manner that we are thinking. All I was saying is that if you are wanting to push for change in the structures that exist right now, you want change within a parliamentary process, you have to deal with the issue that you are going onto a negotiation arena. And I still hold that. I don't think the position that people held was going to provide any process or any opportunity for negotiation. I could be wrong. So that's where I was coming from. I think you can hold your positions, just like when we were young, we held our positions. But the lesson learned was that we had to create frameworks in which we could negotiate to get the changes that we got. So that's where I was coming from. So at no point am I trying to say, think like us, say like us. I think I said when I spoke to Section 210, I said what is important is to begin to think through processes. We have a lot of independent commissions, but people have raised questions around their independence, around their trust, to allow for people to effectively use them for what they were intended for. And I'm saying, for me, Section 210, because it comes through to raise the issues that are topical at this particular point in time, and to which the current president has raised an issue to say we need to make sure that Section 210 is. I think we should not necessarily be reactive, because what will happen is that some bill will be crafted, it will come to Parliament, and we are trying to react to it when it has already been set up. Should this not be the opportunity for the women's movement to say this whole issue around a perceived, real or otherwise, violations by state security, we want it dealt with in this manner because it's already provided for by Section 210. But because we feel that if it is not independent in A, B, C, D, it may not be the necessary structure that women will feel comfortable with. We can't be waiting for government to bring things and then we react to it. Let's find an opportunity where we set up so that government reacts to the issues that we have. You will find that when you are being the one who is reacting, your power dynamics are less. For any process of negotiation, if you are the one who puts something on the table, you are forcing the person to react to what is on your table. And I think that's what we've constantly done. And we need to flip that script so that we are the ones who are putting something on the table so that it's being responded to. The other issues around judicial capture, I'm not going to go into them because as far as I'm concerned, I think that again is a conversation. I'm very worried of things that I can't have scientifically evidence for, because that's the other narrative that I've had a problem with in Zimbabwe. Yes, there are issues that have been problematic, but we have also started generalizing so many things that at the end of the day, we actually lose it, even when we have something that is genuine and that we are holding on to. But as for Section 210, I feel very strongly that it is one thing that we as Zimbabwe need to work on, and we may actually be able to lead the region because there are very few countries that have a proposal for that kind of mechanism. And we may lead the region and Africa in general in terms of coming up with a mechanism that is women friendly and that is safe for women to report to.
Thank you very much, Priscilla, for that. Now we are closing the conversation, and this is our last 7 minutes. So I'm going back to each panelist so that they can give us their parting shots. Our first panelist to check out of the conversation will be Rumbidzai. And Rumbidzai, as you give your parting remarks, there's a question that's been asked by Esteri Magaisa, and she says, Rumbidzai, how best can we challenge the structural system that you mentioned? So as you close, Rumbidzai, in your 1 minute, please may you respond to that question as well.
Thank you. I think in terms of challenging the structural systems, it's not a quick fix solution, it's a process. And these are processes that need to be sustained, and to be sustained in such a way that it's not just one group of people today, but we keep generating the momentum across the country and across different sections, be they women and men, in such a way that no one has the monopoly to say, I'm the one who did this. You can have been maybe spearheading the processes for change. You could have been spearheading the discussions, but ultimately it's about building the societal momentum to confront and demand and hold accountable those who are in leadership, as per the Constitution and as the Constitution guarantees. So I'm very much aware of the fact that it's not an easy question to say we'll do this and that, because I think several interventions have been tried in Zimbabwe, and to a certain extent where you see an element of fatigue, and rightly so, where people just want to focus on the day-to-day living without in any way giving up. You know, like Priscilla saying, she refuses to give up, and no one should give up, because what will become of us if at all we give up and let things be. So there are many things that need to happen. Transformations within political parties. To what extent do women, and not only women, but even the men, are willing to have transformative discussions of the political system itself? And mind you, I'm always saying, where are the benevolent men? Where are we ever going to find the benevolent men who will just give up power? We are dealing about redistribution of power and privileges. And I think that's one thing we need to underline. This is about redistribution of power and privileges. And to what extent do you think those who are in power and we have the privileges will just give it on a silver platter? It won't happen. It just goes back even to the issues about simply advocating for women's basic rights, just having the Legal Age of Majority Act in 1984 when it was put in place. How it was a big issue that, you know, we are now signing off women to do whatever they want, because people misunderstood the whole essence of the Legal Age of Majority Act. And we are still almost stuck in that kind of thinking, where there is no need for and political will and commitment for real change and transformative change. So I don't have a one-word solution to say this is what needs to be done. There are multidimensional interventions, starting in the schools, starting in the political parties especially, and all the institutions that have been put in place. Are they able to take different opinions and work with them, whether they come as reactions to issues or they come as proposal to issues? There's a lot that needs to be done, and I don't think I have any particular precise answer besides giving the broad interventions that need to take place at different levels, and they should be complementary, whether it's being initiated by young women or, you know, elder women.
Okay, thank you so much, Rubitzai, for that. Namgaso, you've got 20 seconds to tell us what you think needs to be done.
I will definitely go back to my introduction, which is that we need to coordinate ourselves as women. We need to network ourselves as women, identify the issues and chart solutions. Legislation dictates how every single citizen is to conduct itself in every nation and every state. So we need to find a way to be included, to be supported, to actually enter those decision-making platforms so that we may be able to contribute to the decisions that are ultimately going to be the legislation that governs how we live. And I mean, in commemorating the fallen hero, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who eloquently coined it as women belong in all places where decisions are being made, I think it's our duty to make sure that we are at those decision-making platforms.
Thank you so much, Namgamso. Priscilla, your parting shots in 20 seconds.
Well, I just think this was wonderful. And I hope that we can continue these conversations. I think they are critical and they are crucial. Last word, decisions are made by those that participate. Let's participate. We may not get the answers today, but surely when we keep hitting on it, we will get there. But this has really been great, and I hope we can continue this.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. Actually, yes, we can actually, we are going to continue this because WAPE wants to develop a position paper. And so this is just part of a broader consultative process with women. So thank you for today's panelists. We will continue to have this consultative process with women in Zimbabwe. And WAPE will engage women from rural areas, the diaspora, and many other spaces to come up with a position on the national question. Mantate, what would be your parting shots?
Thank you so much, Grace. This was an engaging discussion, but one thing I want to say as we go to agree with most of the women that have spoken today is that there is need for solidarity. Solidarity across civil society organizations, where we're looking at women's-led organizations youth-led organizations, but also organizations that specifically work around issues of disability. There is need for coherence in a way, and also there is need for solidarity with the media itself. If you look at organizations such as the Center for Innovation and Technology in Bulawayo, Zakras with the different community radio stations, if you look at Magamba Network, there is need to find, some form of collaboration with these institutions to ensure that the work that we're doing can reach out to more people, at least outside the spaces that we have as institutions. But also there is need to convene around ideas that center around empowering women as political parties, because one of the things that I've seen happen in Zimbabwe is that a lot of the things that do with women's rights, there's always that question of which political party is she from. So there's need to really center around the principles of democracy and human rights that will be able to convene us across different political parties and political ideologies. So my closing statement really is that if the goal is empowerment, the empowerment of women and empowerment of young girls, then there is really a need for us to unite and also be consistent, not unite today because we stand to gain something, but to unite every day, because at the end of the day, everyone stands to gain something if the goal is to empower women.
Thank you, Mantate. Namatsai, your parting shots in 20 seconds, please.
Absolutely. So my reflections are that it's very true what Honorable Priscilla said about taking an incremental approach. So number one, there's need for us to take an incremental approach that is complemented by an intergenerational approach, as well as looking into the long term. I personally feel that one of the reasons why women will consistently, be defeated, or rather we are slowing down, the aspect of us gaining what we want very quickly. Maybe defeat is too strong in this context. I would say it is because we are not looking into the long term. We have to start investing into what is the young person like today, the little girls and the little boys that are young today, not even youth yet, but they're still children. How then do we teach them about ideas of feminism? Because I think that in the long term will yield, more solid and sustainable results, as opposed to us consistently showing up and trying to change the positions and perspectives of those who are already, settled on whatever they believe in. So I think there's much more need for us to look at the young, to look at how best we can be reaching out to children even, and ensure that this feminist narrative is taken, from a long-term perspective. Overall, I just wanted to just express my appreciation to Walpe for putting this up. I really enjoyed this and I learned a lot.
Thank you, Namatai. So we have come to the end of this conversation, the Zimbabwean crisis or situation, women as solution holders, what needs to be done. And thank you so much to this fantastic set of panelists. Namatai Kukweza, thank you. Mantante Tlotwa, thank you very much. Namgamso Kwinana, thank you. Rumbidzai Kandawashika Nundu and Honorable Priscilla Misa and Mshonga, thank you. You were absolutely amazing. Much appreciated.
At SlyMedia Productions, we offer
who were part of this conversation, those people that asked questions, those that participated in any way, thank you so much. And to Walpe, it's always amazing to partner with you in this development process and including women's voices. Thank you for creating the space and thank you for making this happen. And to each and every one of us, let's have a wonderful day. This is me, your moderator, Grace Rimbo Chirenje, who works as the Programs and Campaigns Manager at Accountability Lab Zimbabwe, checking out for the day. Enjoy the rest of your week and let's continue to make a difference for women. Thank you. Back to you, Batanai.
Hi, Grace. Thank you very much. I guess that leaves me to thank everyone who joined us this morning. It has been insightful and it's going to be very useful to WOW. We are using this as the very first consultative process for a position paper that will develop at the end of the process. And your contributions are very invaluable. I want to thank all of you for those insightful conversations that we had. But I guess it would not be enough for me not to mention just one or two takeaways for myself. One of the things that I learned today and I loved was that we need to build societal momentum to demand action, because giving up power and privileges is not going to be happening on a silver platter. So we need to know that that has to be done and effectively and actively pursued. And also that the language that we use has to change. we are not going to be talking about a crisis as women. And I guess it was a good idea to actually bring about a panel of people that understand the issues. So when we talk of a crisis, it does not resonate with the woman that a Zimbabwean is. So thank you very much again for joining us this afternoon. Without further ado, on behalf of WELB, I want to thank you. Goodbye all.
At SlyMedia Productions, we offer live streaming services to companies willing to reach a worldwide audience. We have the capacity to live stream debates from various locations for a wide range of clients.
And our online audience, we welcome you back.
We follow them and help build Zimbabwe brand on a positive note.
On the second report on citizens' perceptions.
And for us, our interest has always been around how do we leverage technology to communicate policy, to communicate public issues.
When you think of reaching the ever-growing internet audience with your video adverts, think SlyMedia TV Online. If you want to pre-package TV programs, documentaries, weddings and church services, think SlyMedia Productions, building bridges. Your TV on the go, anytime, anywhere, worldwide.